I am the current European Outreach Director at GLUT1 Deficiency Foundation, and I'm the...
Sounds far grander. Sorry, go on, yes.
Fancy. And I'm also the chair and founding member at GLUT1 Deficiency UK.
And you're a mum?
Yes, more importantly, I was going to say I'm mum to Cleo, who's 27, and she was diagnosed with GLUT1 at 7.
Oh gosh, that's quite late, isn't it?
Unfortunately it is, yeah.
So could you tell us what is GLUT1 and how, not just does it relate to an epilepsy, how is it an epilepsy? Because I think loads of people, you say gluten and they're like, okay, I need gluten-free bread or something, or it's relating to some kind of diet or whatever. What's GLUT1 epilepsy?
Yeah, I think it's a common error that probably, again, it's a difficult one because you just say glute a lot of the time, but obviously it's glucose, not glute.
Yep.
So yeah, GLUT1 deficiency syndrome is a rare genetic condition that affects brain metabolism. It's caused by a mutation in the SLC2A1 gene, which regulates glucose across the blood-brain barrier. Glucose is the primary source of energy, so GLUT1 deficiency sort of creates an energy crisis in the brain. So it relates to seizures, as you said, the epilepsy side of GLUT1 deficiency, movement disorders, and there's speech, and there's some cognitive delays as well. There's quite a wide range in the severity of the disorder. So
yeah. And yeah, so you say a wide range in severity. So that makes me just think of epilepsies in general. A lot of the time people can be at either end of the spectrum, often compare it to sexuality or something, you can be up, down, middle, whatever. Could you give us some examples? So, I mean, perhaps, for instance, your daughter or somebody else, and differences in people?
Yeah, I mean, again, even with GLUT1 deficiency patients, not all of them have epilepsy as part of the condition. So again, you get tied into the fact that everyone's going to have an epilepsy, but that's not the case.
What percentage is it of people with GLUT1 that have an epilepsy?
I'm unsure of the actual percentage epilepsy-wise, but what we tend to see is epilepsy is a common feature very early on.
Okay.
So onset epilepsy early on, and then later the epilepsy can actually go into sort of later teenage years and then adulthood. Not always the case, but again, so it's very individual, like most epilepsies. Yeah, so for my own daughter, Cleo, she had her first seizure at 8 weeks of age. Okay. So she had some very unusual eye-head movements that are quite, we would say that that's a prominent sign for GLUT1 deficiency. So it's one of our key signals that, which is in some ways, I suppose, a fortunate thing to have such a prominent symptom that could actually point you in the right direction for diagnosis. Yeah, so she had her first seizure at 8 weeks, like I said, and then seizures as time passed, they changed. And again, we must be aware of that it's doesn't remain the same as the kids develop and grow. The epilepsy can change, the movement episodes can change, lots of different symptoms can come and then go, so it's a very changing picture, particularly through the puberty aspect of that we all hit. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, and again, though, what you're saying, I mean, of course, GLUT1 is rather different from other conditions, but also it's remarkably similar. Like your description just now sounds like a person with an epilepsy that might not be considered rare. So, like lots of us might grow out of an epilepsy in our teens, or it could become worse. That's what happened to me. Or, and seizures can change over time, just like you were saying with GLUT1. Again, for instance, myself, I started with focal and then it became into secondary generalized. So yeah, it's so anybody who hasn't got GLUT1, just think you can probably associate or like relate to what you're, it's not the same thing, but we can relate, a lot of us, I think. Would you agree?
I do, and I think there are similarities across, like you said, the spectrum, and that's a good thing as well in some ways, that we can be stronger together, can't we? As a community. There are overlapping symptoms, I think obviously for us as a community, we're trying to find the undiagnosed patients with GLUT1. And again, because of the prevalence, I think there's sort of 1 in every 24,000 patients so that's a high prevalence in comparison to the actual diagnosed patients, which are currently around 2,000 to 3,000 worldwide diagnosed.
Oh, wow.
So we've got many patients to get out there and find.
And where did they come up with the larger number of 1 in, was it 24,000 you said?
Yeah, I know you'll know of obviously Professor Dr. Samir Zubiri. Well,
yes, of course.
so that was a figure that came from one of his studies. And again, I think that with further genetic testing, we'll hopefully find more patients.
Heaps more. Do you know what, this reminds me of another conversation I had with somebody recently in regards to some of the genetic epilepsies, and because that, we tend to see them more, those with the more severe symptoms first, they become more obvious, whereas we can vary, right? I met a chap the other day at a conference, and he had, I can't remember if it's SEN 2A or 8A, and he was a data scientist. And he'd had lobectomy and all these different things, whereas all the other people with this epilepsy, or these 2 epilepsies at the conference, had pretty severe intellectual disability and multiple other symptoms. He didn't. It was extraordinary, and it really clicked. There must be heaps more people who are have differing degrees of severity of these different diseases like GLUT1, right?
Correct. And just because you've got the same genetic mutation doesn't mean you'll get the same symptoms, and it confuses matters all the more. And we have patients that have maybe been diagnosed, and then they start to look down the actual family line, and then maybe the grandmother is found to be having GLUT1, but she's had hardly any symptoms, so it's been genetically passed along the line. But maybe the child that was originally diagnosed, like you said, presented with maybe some more symptoms, some more alarming symptoms, obviously with the epilepsy and things like that, and track back, and then you find, grandma has got hardly any symptoms. So
and you're like, dude, I'm jealous of you. What's going on? Yeah. and so and GLUT1 is so a common question people have when it comes to genetic epilepsies. Is it inherited, or is it a de novo mutation, or can be a bit of both?
Yeah, again, it's a bit of both. So, there are it crosses several different ways of, but mainly our children get diagnosed and they've not had it, it's just a spontaneous mutation. So that was the case for my own daughter, Cleo. She's, just a spontaneous mutation, and she was the lucky one to get chosen. So
lucky, yeah.
Yes, lucky or not,
yeah. And so in many people with an epilepsy, including GLUT1, other, for instance, Dravet or Ring 20 or whatever, other types of rare epilepsy, as well as more common epilepsies, actually, people say, do you know what, seizure control is not my priority. It really isn't. It can be other things like movement disorders, like mental health conditions, like the isolation they might feel and things like that. And the same goes actually for parents or carers of these people too. They can have, it depends who you speak to, like what their priority for their health is. Would you say that's similar with GLUT1 as well?
I would. I think, again, we've done some projects with the GLUT1 Deficiency Foundation, a collective voices project, again, to just gauge, what other people found the priority. And it isn't always the epilepsy, because if you are actually unaware of your seizures, then again, it may not be the highest priority. I would say that the movement disorder is, again, can be quite difficult and quite challenging for our patients. If you don't know when it's going to happen, it doesn't necessarily mean that movement disorder is there all the time. It is literally, spontaneous, and that can be difficult and challenging for obviously patients. So yeah.
And so what is the common treatment or changes that a person with GLUT1 might have to make to their lifestyle or whatever? You tell us what's
well, the current treatment is the ketogenic diet, and this provides an alternative fuel to the brain in the form of ketones. So it's not a cure at all, but it is a treatment, and the treatment obviously for many of our patients of choice. So yeah, that's our current form of treatment. We've got researchers out there now looking for alternatives, and they're working hard, I'm sure. But yeah, that is our current treatment. And Cleo's been on the ketogenic diet now for over 20 years. So
oh wow.
It's a long time.
Yeah, and how has that affected her? And I mean, has it been positive? Has it reduced seizure frequency? Has it affected other parts of her life?
I would say it's very positive. I mean, she has tried to come off several times. We hit a period through puberty, which was difficult. And so again, that sort of made us think, oh, maybe we need to try now to come off of the diet. But it became pretty clear pretty quickly that she needed to go back on. And if she was sat here now with me, she would be saying to you, yeah, it's her treatment of choice, because it gives her the best quality of life that she can live as normally as possible.
And does she or do other people with GLUT1 have to take anti-seizure medications too, or can, yeah?
Yeah, again, it does differ. I think that the earlier the diagnosis and the treatment begins, there tends to be better outcome.
Yeah.
But again, most of our patients do have a lovely period where they're not using any anti-epilepsy medications. But then again, you have to adapt as and when the patient obviously changes and if seizures reoccur. So.
Yeah, and so I mean, there was one piece I read ages ago about a young girl a young girl who had GLUT1, and she was not diagnosed overly early, and as a result of that, it actually led to some abnormalities in her neurological development and intellectual development. And if caught earlier, they say they would have been able to prevent that, and she would have had perhaps a sort of, I'm grabbing at straws here, but like a higher IQ, for instance. The impact on her cognitive function might not have been so severe. Is that found with other people sometimes?
I think that there is, to wait to find out is a difficult one, isn't it? Because if you are diagnosed early, then I think that we all should be encouraging our patients to, start the ketogenic diet as early as possible, because that provides the best outcomes.
Okay.
So again, whether or not you can look back in hindsight, or, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I would say that you have better outcomes if you start the diet as early as possible.
And so I see a lot of people flinging around hashtag keto and and like it's some kind of, attractive, sexually attractive way of living, if you like. Now, can you tell us the difference between the keto diet and the proper ketogenic diet, please?
Yeah, again, it is a therapeutic, medically supervised ketogenic diet. So it's not something that we just decide we're going to now put our children on. We are handled under a medical team. We have our individual dietitians who are amazing, again, because there are lots of adaptations that need to be made to the diet. So again, depending on the child's weight and growth, and so you have to have adequate protein for growth. You have to have fairly low carbohydrate to be able to provide, the ketones for the brain, and a high amount of fat. So it's all balanced out to enable the child to be able to grow normally. And then as and when, the development obviously of the child, then that diet is again tailored for that child. So many of our patients are on different types. So there's MCT diet, there's the classical diet. So again, that's really down to the actual individual team and that family of how they, are going to manage their diet. But with great support, there are great outcomes.
Like, you made me think of Matthew's Friends. They're an organization specializing in ketogenic diet. Well, yeah, the ketogenic diet, right?
Yes, obviously Matthew's Friends support many of our GLUT1 patients that are using the ketogenic diet for their treatment, along with Daisy Garland too. And in the States, we've got the Charlie Foundation. So, there are organizations out there, and there's great parental support as well, which is such a helpful resource to be able to chat to a mum that, the mum's struggling, and then you can have somebody. Or a dad, or a granny.
Yeah.
Anybody can give support if you feel that you can gain some insight from another and some comfort. I think that's so important to find somebody else on the same journey as you. Really important.
And so the basically, I think, so regarding the ketogenic diet, it's not something that can be sort of flung around, or, you know, I'll try this, or I'll just do half the ketogenic diet, then I'll have my chocolate bar. That's okay. It's not okay in this, is it?
It really isn't. Again, you are sort of, you need to stay on your plan to be able to get the best outcomes and best results. And your team will work with you to, you know, to achieve the best results. That's what they're there for. Our ketogenic dietitians are amazing. They really are such a wonderful resource and support. So yeah, it is something, it's a family commitment, but I also feel that how many families have the chance to be able to help their children control their seizures? You know, it's a positive thing. We also think about, oh, diet, and you can't eat this and you can't eat that. But, you know, if we could spin it on his head and say, you know, I can make a dish and make my child's food, and that can really help them with their symptoms and their seizures. I think that's great. That's a great outcome.
I completely agree, and I love your spin on that positive spin. I was a while ago, I was speaking to a dad of a son who had a rare epilepsy, Dravet in this case, and the ketogenic diet had changed his life. Like, this is one extreme case, but changed his life completely. He was having hardly any seizures. He was going to normal school. He was developing in a sort of normal way, if you like. I hate that term. I don't know what term I should have used. And the mum and the dad were actually doing the keto with him.
Yeah.
Do you come across that sometimes?
Oh yeah, we've got the whole family on, you know, that can really do get on board. And there's so many other products out there now that, you know, are available to pick off the shelf. I think people are more open to it in general. And I know what you're saying about the lifestyle keto, maybe, you know, isn't the angle we want to go down, but it has helped normalize, you know, the situation. And if there are things that you can just lift off the shelf now to, you know, pop in your bag for a snack, it makes life easier again, you know, for traveling and, you know, days out. We want our kids to feel as if they're, you know, able to take part in all aspects of life, even with being on a therapeutic, medically supervised diet. It's really important that they're, you know, accepted into their, you know, the party they get invited to and the school trip. You know, we need them to take part in all those things.
I've read also some feedback from mums and dads whose kids might be on the diet and say, oh my God, this is so expensive. Like, it can be really expensive. But then I've also read pieces, I think there was something from Matthew's friends recently where they said, okay, dude, this isn't going to be expensive. Get this. So there are ways around it. Would you agree? That aren't necessarily easy.
No, and I would agree that I have heard that argument that there are, you know, it can be expensive. I mean, we're very fortunate in the UK because we do have a lot of our products on prescription. So, you know, we're very
food on prescription.
Yeah, there's lots of, and the fat supplements that you add and the protein supplements that you can add and things like that. So they're on prescription. So as long as you're under, again, a medical team, those will be part of the child's diet normally. Okay. And just talking from my own experience, I mean, Cleo really just only had their appetite tends to get curbed because they're producing ketones. Yeah. They just don't want to eat as much. And then she liked her favorite things, and I could sort of stick to those things. And that made life very easy as well. You know, you don't have to be Nigella. You know, you can literally, you know, prepare beforehand, freeze things. You know, it's all about preparation. And again, go to Matthew's friends for all their recipes. Daisy Garland, great support, and the Charlie Foundation. You know, we have wonderful outside support just for the ketogenic diet.
Right. And so if you could make a couple of points that you think are important for people to know about or look into more when it comes to GLUT1 deficiency syndrome, what would you say they are? Because we've spoken a lot about seizures, understandably, because that does form a huge part often of this rare disease. But what else would you?
As I said, I think that there are some key early signs, which are these unusual eye-head movements. And you mightn't particularly look at that and think that's a seizure, but we've got plenty of links on our website and the GLUT1 Deficiency Foundation as well. And there's a long fancy name for them called aberrant gaze saccades, but we call them, it's very long. So we just call them unusual eye-head movements now. Okay. And it's a very specific early symptom. And so if we can get diagnosed early and then start the ketogenic diet, that is a key.
Yeah.
I would also say that later on as well. I mean, obviously, like I said, Cleo wasn't diagnosed until she was 7. Some people aren't getting diagnosed until they're teenagers, and adulthood. There's a specific crisscross type of movement as well that's again related to GLUT1, and we've got some evidence of that, video evidence on our websites as well. Just to it's a little pointer to say, if any neurologist or a movement expert is looking at that, think twice. Now, could that be GLUT1 deficiency? Again, because if we can get tested, then that is the key to, again, treatment beginning. So, yeah, I would say that we've got some difficulties around making awareness around adult transition. You know, pediatrics to adult transition is quite difficult, because whilst the children are wrapped in pediatrics, they're really well cared for. You know, the dietary aspect of things and adult transition can be quite tricky for all kids.
I've got a person to look up if you want information about transition into adult care. That is Danielle Andrande, if you know of her.
No, I don't know.
Okay, she's an absolute star. She featured on the podcast, I don't know, a year or so ago, and she specifically works in pediatric to adult care. It's one of her passions. So I'll put the link to that below here. And she's based in Toronto, but she's everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a key for all our community at the moment, just realizing that, you know, whilst they're in pediatrics, they get, you know, an immense amount of care. But then actually finding a neurologist that, again, that's in, you know, adult care is more difficult, because it is a rare, you know, condition. So at the end of the day, it's more difficult to transition alongside with the ketogenic diet.
Well, anybody, if you want to learn more about GLUT1, remember, it's worth learning about. You can relate. If you've heard of the ketogenic diet, you should be interested in GLUT1 deficiency disorder, a rare type of epilepsy with associated movement disorders, sometimes intellectual disability, etc., many other things. If people want to get hold of you, Trudy, what should they do if they want to find out more about you and your work?
Well, you can find me on the GLUT1 Deficiency Foundation website, or you can also find me on the GLUT1 Deficiency UK website. And we've got a Facebook page. All our social medias are covered. Yeah, and I'd love to chat to anybody if anybody has any questions. More importantly, Tori, I'd like to thank you very much for being a great supporter of our GLUT1 community. It's a real honour to be invited today, and it's a special day for us, obviously, being International GLUT1 Awareness Day, and you've really made my highlight. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.